Today, we are going to the mid-19th century, so sit back as we go to the USA. John White Webster was born on May the 20th, 1793, in Boston, Massachusetts. He had a comfortable upbringing as he came from a well-off and well-connected family. As a child, he was known to be fussy, but also very kind, and it was no surprise to his family and friends that he wanted to study to become a doctor. He attended Harvard Medical College and graduated in 1815. Shortly after his graduation, he went to Guy's Hospital in London. John was in London for 2 years, until 1817, when he left to spend the next year practicing medicine on the small island of São Miguel in the Azores. While there, he met a young lady named Harriet Frederica Hickling, who was a daughter of the American Vice Consul on the island, and after a relatively short courtship, John and Harriet married on the 16th of May, 1818. John liked to write and completed his first book while living and working on São Miguel. The couple returned to Boston later that year, and John set up his own private medical practice. Unfortunately, this was not a very successful venture, and he needed more money to support his growing family. So in 1821, he agreed to take a position as a lecturer of chemistry, mineralogy, and geology at the Harvard Medical College. 3 years later, he was promoted to the Irving Professorship. George Parkman was born on the 19th of February, 1790, into one of Boston's wealthiest families. As a child, he suffered from poor health, and while at school, decided that he wanted to study medicine. He was a very intelligent child who, after finishing school, went to study at Harvard University. When he graduated, he travelled to Scotland and studied at the University of Aberdeen, where, as well as obtaining a medical degree, he witnessed the impoverished housing conditions in Georgian Britain. He returned home in 1813, before again returning to Europe, where he spent time in France and became very interested by the work of the doctors who were trying to establish more humane mental health facilities in the country. When he returned to Boston, he tried to gain support for a similar facility. The project did not materialise, so his father asked him to administer all of the rental income from the many properties that he owned. George's father had made a lot of money as a merchant, and by purchasing land and property, often in the poorer areas of Boston. He had 11 children from 2 marriages, and considered that George would be the most suited to assume control of his business. It was not exactly what George wanted to do, but he took his responsibilities for his extended family's trust very seriously. He dealt directly with his tenants, collecting all of the rents himself. He would also lend money, often by a client putting up furniture or property in the way of collateral. He became a well-known and well-respected figure in Boston, and would be seen every day, immaculately dressed, walking around the city and collecting his rents. While Dr. Parkman was amassing more wealth in property, investments and rental income, Dr. Webster was experiencing very poor financial circumstances. He had been forced to give up a large house that he had built in the Cambridge area of the city, and was renting a smaller, albeit respectable property. He was in debt to a number of friends, and he found it difficult to cover his expenses. He first borrowed $400 from Dr. Parkman in 1842, but he had never really paid any of the loan. 5 years later, in 1847, Dr. Parkman presented Dr. Webster with an outstanding debt of capital and interest totaling over $2,400. This was secured by a mortgage on Dr. Webster's personal property, including a cabinet of minerals. Dr. Webster seemed very poor at handling money. He wanted to reduce the debt that he owed Dr. Parkman, so he borrowed $1,200 from another moneylender in order to pay back part of a loan. and as collateral, he made over his collection of minerals. This, however, was an issue, as the collection already stood as collateral for the loan provided by Dr. Parkman. When Dr. Parkman heard about this, he was very angry. In the evening of Monday the 19th of November, 1849, Dr. Webster was being assisted by the caretaker named Ephraim Littlefield. He and his wife Caroline lived in the basement of the medical college, right next to Dr. Webster's laboratory. He knew Dr. Webster and the other Harvard doctors well, and would help them obtain dead bodies, which assisted in their study of medicine and human anatomy. He also cleaned the doctors' rooms and laboratories, and started their fires for their furnaces. Suddenly, George Parkman entered the room. He appeared to be angry, and abruptly said to Dr. Webster, "Are you ready for me tonight?" Dr. Webster replied, "No, I am not." Dr. Parkman then told Dr. Webster that he would see him soon, and without saying goodbye, he turned and left. 4 days later, on November the 23rd, Dr. Parkman left his home about midday, telling his wife that he had an appointment at 2:30. He strolled towards his destination, and at about 1:30 he stopped at the grocery store. He placed an order for some vegetables and said that he would like to return to collect them later. The store was very close to the Harvard Medical College. Dr. Parkman left the grocery store and walked towards the college, where at about 2 p.m. he was seen by Elias Fuller and his brother Albert, who both worked in an iron foundry very close to the college. About an hour later, at 3:15, the caretaker Littlefield went to Dr. Webster's laboratory to clean up. He was concerned as he had seen a sledgehammer behind the door earlier in the day and wanted to make sure that everything was returned to its correct place. When he arrived, however, he found the door bolted from the inside. Despite banging on it, the caretaker received no response, even though he could hear someone walking inside, who he presumed would have been Dr. Webster. He then went to another door, but that too was bolted. Dr. Parkman had been due to meet a colleague named Charles Kingsley the same afternoon, but despite being known for his punctuality, Dr. Parkman never arrived. He also never returned to collect his vegetables, and when he never came home that evening, the family contacted the police. News of his disappearance soon spread among the local people, and some sections of Boston's high society offered large rewards for information on his whereabouts. Police thought that as he had many tenants who sometimes struggled to pay and sometimes were considered to be non-law-abiding people, that it was possible that one of his tenants had murdered and robbed him and then disposed of his body. The authorities instructed that the Charles River be dredged and an extensive search of the harbour. They also had the tenants' homes and nearby buildings searched. Despite this comprehensive search, Dr. Parkman's body was not found. The police traced the movements of Dr. Parkman to where he was last seen. This led them to visit Dr. Webster. They interviewed the caretaker Littlefield, who told them that he had seen Dr. Parkman on the day he went missing, but had not seen him since. When the police arrived, the door was bolted, but eventually it was opened by Dr. Webster. The police noted that the fire was burning in the furnace. Dr. Webster told the police that Dr. Parkman had visited him at the college, as he had arranged to collect $450, which he had lent to him. He said that he had been able to pay the full amount, as he had sold tickets to a course of lectures he was given in the college. He then produced a receipt given to him by Dr. Parkman as proof that he had paid the debt. He added that the doctor had indicated that he would go right away to have the payment recorded by the city clerk. He said the last time he saw the doctor was when he was leaving the college. It was hard for the police not to believe Dr. Webster. He was from a good family and was considered to be an honest and upstanding member of the community. They told him that they had instructions to search his laboratory, but carried out the search in a vague and almost apologetic way. Not surprisingly, they didn't find anything and went back to the station. The police had made very little progress in finding what had happened to George Parkman, and the story of the missing doctor dominated the conversations of the Boston streets and in the shops. There were whispers that maybe the caretaker had something to do with the disappearance, and Ephraim Littlefield started to feel a little uneasy with his situation. Dr. Webster, however, was acting a little strangely. He had asked the caretaker if he had seen Dr. Parkman at the college the previous week, or saw him leave the building. This was strange, as Dr. Webster would never take time to speak to the caretaker unless he needed him to do something. Littlefield also recalled that a few days before the doctor went missing, Dr. Webster had questioned him about the dissecting vault. Littlefield's living quarters were adjacent to Dr. Webster's laboratory on the upper basement of the medical college building. He came to think that as he saw Dr. Parkman arrive at the college but did not see him leave, his body had to be hidden somewhere on the premises, and concluded that the only place that had not been searched was the vault. The caretaker then decided to do his own investigation. He spent November the 29th and 30th trying to chisel his way into the vault. When he eventually managed to break into it, he made a macabre discovery: the remains of a human body. He was unsure what remains they were, but it later transpired that it was a pelvis, a right thigh, and part of a left leg. The police were immediately contacted and rushed to the college, where a thorough search was carried out. This time they discovered fragments of human bone in a furnace, together with blocks of false teeth. When inspecting a tea chest, they found a human thorax and part of a leg. Around the leg was tied a piece of twine, similar to that found in Dr. Webster's laboratory. The various remains were examined and found to be part of a single body that resembled the body of the missing Dr. Parkman. A dentist named Dr. Keep identified the false teeth found in the furnace as part of the set that he had prepared for the missing man. A police officer and 2 other constables were sent to Dr. Webster's house, where he was arrested and taken into custody on the charge of murder. The trial of John White Webster began on the 19th of March, 1850, and was presided over by Judge Lemuel Shaw. The case was the first to involve forensic anthropology, forensic odontology, and forensic document analysis. Dr. Jeffries Wyman and Dr. Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr. had been asked to assess the body and the body parts that had been found. Dr. Wyman concluded that they were from a man who was around 5 foot 10 inches tall, which was the same height as Dr. Parkman. Dr. Holmes was in charge of finding the cause and the manner of death. He testified that the body had been dismembered by someone who had a very good knowledge of anatomy. He also discovered a wound between the ribs on the torso, which he considered the probable cause of death. The trial lasted for 12 days, and before the jury was sent out to deliberate the case, the judge informed them that the usual legal standard for a capital murder case was to prove to an absolute certainty that the dead body was in fact that of the victim. But Judge Shaw set a new precedent and instructed the jury that they only needed to find, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the body was Dr. Parkman's. The judge also outlined to the jury the difference between murder and manslaughter, the fact that there were no eyewitnesses to the crime, and the legitimacy of circumstantial evidence. The jury deliberated for 3 hours before returning a unanimous decision that Dr. Webster was guilty of murder, and Judge Shaw sentenced him to death by hanging. His lawyers submitted a petition for a writ of error against Judge Shaw and his instructions to the jury. but this was denied. They then appealed to the governor, George N. Briggs, for a pardon, but this was also denied. Dr. Webster was going to pay for his crime. In June, the doctor wrote a confession. He admitted killing Dr. Parkman, but stated that it was in self-defence. There were more calls for his sentence to be commuted, but the governor said that justice had to be carried out. On August the 30th, 1850, at Boston's Leverett Street Jail, Dr. Webster was publicly hanged. After his death, a fund was set up for his widow and daughters, who now found themselves in impoverished circumstances, and the first person to contribute was Dr. Parkman's widow. Since the 1850 execution, different theories have emerged surrounding this case. One is that Dr. Webster was placed in a harness and was never hanged and returned to live in the Azores. Another, that he was innocent of his crime and was set up by the college caretaker, Ephraim Littlefield. Hello everyone, and thank you so much for listening. As per usual, please leave any comments or feedback you may have, and I will see you in the next Brief Case